The palace at Varenhall had never been quiet, not really. Even at 3 in the morning, when the corridors emptied and the great chandeliers were dimmed to a low amber glow, there was always some sound moving through the old stone, a door closing far away, the soft tread of a night steward, the wind pressing against the tall windows like a hand asking to be let in. Prince Adrian of the House of Calloway had learned, over the years, to hear the difference between the ordinary sounds and the ones that meant something. And on this particular night, sitting alone in his study with a single lamp burning and a thick leather folder open on the desk before him, he knew that the thing keeping him awake was not a sound at all. It was a signature. A signature he was being asked to give, and one that every instinct in his body was telling him to withhold. The folder had arrived that afternoon by way of the palace's media office, delivered with the kind of careful ceremony that told him at once how much money was involved. Inside were pages and pages of contract language, dense and confident, stamped with the crest of one of the largest streaming companies in the world. The offer was by any measure extraordinary, a multi-part documentary series, unprecedented access. A sum of money so large that the household treasurer had underlined it twice and written a small, hopeful exclamation point in the margin. It would fund the restoration of 3 crumbling royal properties. It would secure the pensions of dozens of aging staff. It would, the accompanying letter promised in warm and flattering language, reintroduce the Calloway family to a new generation across the world. Adrian had read the letter twice. Then he had closed the folder and asked to be left alone. He was not a man who distrusted the modern world. Unlike his late father, who had regarded television cameras as a kind of personal insult, Adrian understood that a monarchy in this century survived only if people could see it, know it, feel some thread of connection to it. He had spent years opening hospital wings and visiting flood-struck villages and standing patiently while photographers arranged him just so. He knew the value of being visible. But there was a difference, one he felt in his chest more than he could put into words, between being visible and being consumed. And everything about the contract in that folder felt like consumption. The heart of the deal, the part that had made his jaw tighten the moment he reached it, concerned his wife. Princess Elinor had come into the House of Calloway 11 years earlier, and in that time she had given the family something it had not had in generations, a sense of ease. Where the older royals were stiff, she was warm. Where they recited, she spoke. Crowds who came to see the spectacle of monarchy left having felt, unexpectedly, that they had met a real person. She had a way of crouching down to a child's height and listening as though nothing in the world mattered more than what that child had to say. She remembered names. She noticed the nervous ones at the back of a room and made her way to them. The public adored her, and the press, sensing that adoration, wanted more of her than she had ever agreed to give. What they did not see, what almost no one saw, was the cost of it. Adrian saw it. He saw the way Elinor sat very still in the car on the way home from a long day, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the middle distance, gathering herself back together piece by piece. He saw the nights she could not sleep after a particularly cruel headline, the way she would pretend not to have read it while the newspaper lay folded a little too deliberately on the far side of the room. He had watched, in the early years of their marriage, a bright and open young woman slowly learn to armor herself, to measure every word, to smile through moments that would have reduced most people to tears. She had never once complained. That was almost the worst part. She simply absorbed it, the way the old palace walls absorbed the wind, and told him she was fine. The documentary would have asked her to open all of that up. He had read the production notes carefully, and beneath the polished language he could see exactly what they wanted. They wanted the private Elinor. They wanted the cameras in the family's rooms, at the breakfast table, in the quiet hours. They wanted her to talk on film about the hardest years, the miscarriage the public had never known about, the long stretch when she had barely left the palace, the rift with her own family that had never fully healed. The producers called it authenticity. They used the word again and again, as though it were a gift they were offering rather than a thing they intended to take. And they had structured the money so that the most personal material carried the highest value, the largest guaranteed episodes, the deepest access. They were not asking Elinor to appear in a documentary. They were asking her to hand over the last private corner of herself, and they were willing to pay a fortune for it. Adrian closed his eyes. He thought about the first time he had understood what it meant to love someone in the position they were in. It had been early, before the wedding even, at a garden party where a photographer had climbed a wall to get a picture of Elinor adjusting her shoe. Nothing scandalous, just a young woman caught off guard, her face for one unguarded second showing the exhaustion she worked so hard to hide. That photograph had run on the front pages for a week, dissected and captioned and mocked. Elinor had laughed it off in public. In private, she had asked him very quietly whether it would always be like this. He had promised her that he would protect her from the worst of it. It was, he now understood, a promise far easier to make than to keep. But it was a promise he had never stopped trying to honor. A soft knock came at the study door. "Come," he said. It was Havard, his private secretary, a lean and gray-haired man who had served the family for 3 decades and possessed an almost supernatural ability to appear precisely when he was needed. He carried a cup of tea, which he set down at Adrian's elbow without being asked, and then stood with his hands folded, waiting. "You should be asleep," Adrian said. "So should you, sir?" Havard's eyes moved to the folder. "The media office is anxious for an answer. They've had 3 calls from the company's representatives today alone. There is, I gather, a great deal of enthusiasm on their side." "I imagine there is." Adrian turned the folder slowly with one finger. "Tell me honestly, Havard, what does the household think I should do?" The older man considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "The household," he said carefully, "sees the number at the bottom of the page. The properties need work that we cannot otherwise afford. The staff are loyal, and some of them are owed more security than we have been able to give them. On paper, sir, it is the most sensible thing the family could do." "On paper," Adrian repeated. "On paper," Havard agreed. There was a pause. "But I have served this family a long time, and I have learned that the things which look most sensible on paper are sometimes the things one regrets most in life." He glanced toward the door, toward the wing of the palace where Elinor slept. "May I ask what Her Royal Highness thinks?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't know the full details yet," he admitted. "She knows there's an offer. She doesn't know what they're asking of her specifically." He rubbed his eyes. "And I know exactly what she'll say when she finds out. She'll say she can do it. She'll say if it helps the family, she'll manage. She'll square her shoulders and volunteer to be taken apart on camera because she thinks that's her duty." His voice hardened, not at Havard, but at the whole machinery that had trained his wife to think that way. "And that is precisely why I have to decide this before she does." Havard said nothing, but something in his expression suggested approval. Adrian rose from the desk and walked to the window. Below him, the palace grounds stretched out in silver darkness, the old gardens and the long gravel drive and the gates beyond, where even at this hour a photographer or 2 might be waiting, patient as herons, for a single lit window that might mean something. He thought about the word the producers kept using: authenticity. As though the only real version of a person was the one bleeding on camera. As though a family's private grief was a resource to be mined, refined, and sold by the episode. He thought about all the times Elinor had been generous with the public, freely and warmly, and how that generosity was now being treated as a down payment on a debt she had never agreed to owe. "They believe," he said slowly, still facing the glass, "that because she is loved, she belongs to them, that her privacy is a kind of selfishness, that every part of her life is content waiting to be released." He turned back to face the room. "But a person is not a resource, Havard. A marriage is not a season of television, and I did not spend 11 years watching that woman hold herself together only to sell the pieces to the highest bidder." "Then you have your answer, sir." "I do." Adrian looked down at the folder. "The trouble is what it costs, not the money, I mean the rest of it. If I refuse, the company will not go quietly. They will let it be known that the palace was difficult, secretive, out of touch. There will be stories. That the family had a chance to open itself up and chose the old ways instead. That we have something to hide." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "The one thing they cannot stand is being told no, and they have a great many ways of punishing it." "That is likely true," Havard said. "You will be criticized for it." "Yes. Some will say you are protecting the institution rather than the person." "Let them." Adrian's voice was quiet but absolutely certain. "I know which one I'm protecting." He sat back down and drew a sheet of the household's writing paper toward him. For a long moment he simply held the pen, feeling the weight of what he was about to set in motion. He was not naive. He knew that a decision made at 3 in the morning still had to be lived with in the daylight, defended in meetings, explained to advisors who would see only the lost fortune. He knew there would be a difficult conversation with the treasurer, and a more difficult one with the members of the family who had already begun, quietly, to spend the money in their imaginations. He knew, too, that Elinor would be angry with him at first, not because she wanted to do the documentary, but because he had made a decision that touched her life without waking her to ask. That conversation, he thought, would be the hardest of all, but he would rather face her anger than her slow unraveling in front of a camera crew. He began to write. He wrote not to the company's lawyers, but to their most senior executive by name in his own hand. He thanked them genuinely for their interest in the family and their evident admiration for the princess. He acknowledged the generosity of the offer and the good that the money might have done. And then, in plain and unmistakable language, he declined. He explained that the House of Callaway would always seek to serve the public and to remain open to it in the ways that mattered through its work, its presence, its duty. But that there were parts of a life that were not for sale, and that the private history of his wife, her grief and her healing and the quiet battles she had fought and won, belonged to her and to no one else. He wrote that he hoped they would understand. He suspected they would not. He signed it anyway. When he had finished, he read it over once, folded it, and set it in the tray for the morning post. Then he closed the leather folder and, after a moment's thought, placed it in the lowest drawer of the desk, out of sight. "It's done," he said. Havard inclined his head. "I'll see that the media office knows in the morning, sir, and I'll prepare them for the response." "Thank you." Adrian looked suddenly very tired, but the tension that had held him rigid all evening had gone out of his shoulders. "There's one more thing. When Elinor wakes, don't let anyone tell her about this. I'll do it myself." "Of course, sir." Havard withdrew as quietly as he had come, and the study was still again. Adrian sat for a while longer in the lamplight. He thought about the criticism that would come and found, somewhat to his surprise, that it did not frighten him. He had spent his whole life being told what the role required, what the institution needed, what the public was owed. And he had come to believe, slowly and at some cost, that a role which required him to feed his wife to the machinery of spectacle was not a role worth preserving in that form. The monarchy could survive being called old-fashioned. It could survive being called private. What it could not survive, what nothing could survive, was the steady hollowing out of the people inside it until only the performance remained. He rose at last and went to the window one final time. Somewhere beyond the gates, the world was already turning toward morning, and with it the whole apparatus of opinion and appetite that would soon have something new to say about him. Let it. He had made his choice, and he understood it fully now. It was not, in the end, a decision about a contract or a sum of money or the reputation of a house. It was much simpler than that. It was a husband deciding that the woman he loved was not a story to be told, but a person to be protected. Everything else was noise. He turned off the lamp. In the quiet dark, he made his way through the sleeping palace toward the wing where Elinor lay, resolved that when she woke he would tell her everything, the offer, the refusal, the reasons, and that if she was angry, he would bear it, and if she was relieved, he would hold her, and that either way she would never have to know how close she had come to being asked to give away the last private piece of herself. Some things a person kept. Some things a person guarded for those they loved, quietly, expecting no thanks. That, he had decided long ago, was what the word meant when he had spoken it at the altar. Not the crown, not the duty. Just this, that he would stand between her and the cold when the cold came for her, and that he would not step aside, no matter how much they offered him to move. Outside, the first pale light touched the tops of the trees. Inside, the palace slept on, and the prince who would one day be king walked its dark corridors alone, having refused a fortune, having invited the world's disapproval, and having never once in the whole long night doubted that he had done the right thing.